Well, I started off, I really don't have any artistic ability myself, but I have a keen eye to know it when I see it. And so I started off collecting antique clocks, and then I went to bronze statuary and oriental rugs, but the lamps always drew my attention, in the glass and the beauty. And as the years went along, the most unusual thing happened. I happened to be in Kalamazoo, Michigan. That's a college town, and I have relation there. But anyway, I was in a little corner mom and dad grocery store, and just inside the door was a little cork board with all these different advertisements. You know, sell your lawnmower, or I do painting, that kind of thing. And on there was Handel lamp for sale. So I called and I went over there, and this elderly lady had this Handel lamp base. And so I bought it from her. And as I was leaving, she said, "Young man, my husband was in the lamp repair business for 60 years, and that 6-stall garage right there was his, and it's filled with stuff. Would you be interested?" Would I? So I had a look and asked her what she wanted for it, and I paid her. She had a stipulation that it had to be broom clean. Everything's gone. Luckily, it was Kalamazoo is a college town, 2 great colleges there. And so I hired these strapping young men, and I brought in a 40-foot dumpster, and probably half of it or more went to the dumpster, but the rest of it was just like gold. All of these pieces and parts for lamps and clocks and so forth. A lot of glass, the brass pieces and parts in these lamps, you know, nobody's got them, but I do now. And so as the years went along, the people who had these fine old lamps, if they wanted them to repaired, my name got around, and it brings, I don't know if joy is the right word, but a good feeling to be able to help people return those fine old antiques back to once they were. And so I do that, and I still have a lot of those pieces and parts. In fact, when the Egon Neustadt lamp collection came to Lakeview Museum 3 decades ago, I loaned a couple of my lamps that they did not have, and also I provided that group with a lot of pieces and parts that they did not have. So that was kind of an exhilarating thing for me. But as the years went along, I'll back up a couple of decades. When I was with the Natkin Company, we had 17 locations, all answering to me in metropolitan areas around our country. And they called me the fly-by-night guy. I would usually show up at night. That's when the fares were the best. And I always wanted to set a good example for thousands of employees. Normally, I would spend a day and a half or 2 days talking business, but the manager there always knew that to keep time, 3 or 4 hours, so Don Shay could run his traps, and that was going to the antique places. And in those days, in antique shops, you could buy Tiffany lamps and other high-end lamps. Gorman over here on the end is a special lamp. Now, it's kind of hard to find them, but I have a little amazing story. I have a web page, and an old lady called me from Omaha, Nebraska, and she had a Handel lamp and wanted to learn about it. So she had no computer, so she took some photographs and went to Walgreens and had analog photographs made, if you can believe that. I didn't know people still did analog, but at any rate, she sent them to me, and I called her up. And this was Aunt Minnie's lamp, and this is the lamp that they remembered Aunt Minnie by. And so I sent her description, photographs, where it was made, and all the details, and she was clear it was not for sale, and I understood that. And at the end of the conversation, I said, well, if you ever decide to sell it, I would pay you $7,000 for the lamp. And she said, Yahoo, sold. We'll remember Aunt Minnie by something else. So you see, those fine old antiques and lamps, they're around. They may be in a situation of disrepair on a basement shelf, but as the prices and the value comes up, it squeezes them out, and people like me are around to buy them. So just when you think the country's going to run out of these fine old antiques, more come around, and it's kind of a neat thing. Well, I'm retired now. Actually, sold my business 8 years ago, so I'm free at last. But I started off. Well, actually, I've been a Peorian my whole of my 74 years. 72 of them have been in Peoria, and it's been a great place to raise up. My parents raised me and 3 other boys here, and 2 of them are still here. Larry Shay, retired from Caterpillar. Bill Shay, who has his own law firm not 1,000 feet from here. And my oldest brother, Jim, who's in Springfield, Illinois. And everybody's doing just fine. I was in the mechanical contracting business. I started off as an apprentice with the powerful Natkin company. And 20 years later, almost to the day, I was the president and CEO of Natkin Service, moved to Denver, and by the way, learned to ski. And then 3 years later, came back to Peoria, started my own business with my lifelong friend Del Grog, and we started the Illinois mechanical business. We bought the Baker Hauser company, which is a name that everybody recognizes around this region. And then we ran that business for 18 years and sold it to the Carrier Corporation. And I'm pleased to say that the company's still doing very well. A little hard, tugs at my heart to say that, doing very well without me at the helm, but oh well, everything works out okay. Peoria is really a neat town. I think we do not accentuate the river town as much as we should. If you think about all the tens of thousands of cities that don't have the great asset of being a river town, another thing that Peoria has is the 4 seasons. So when I was in Denver for a few years, I realized that really you don't get the seasons. As an example, at the end of summer, it turns into winter real fast, with just being on the west side of or the east side of the mountains. But I also have a home in Naples, Florida, and you really don't get the seasons there either. Peoria, clearly you get all the seasons, and we just came through autumn. Gosh, the trees were so beautiful, and the view of the river. You know, I look forward to the spring. Karen and I will come back in the spring. I'll tell you one thing that I miss. I don't miss cold weather, but I think sometimes about walking in the fresh snow and the snow on my face, and I kind of long for that. I've not had that for a few years, so I don't know, maybe I'll come home mid-season and do experiment with that again. Well, I have always enjoyed museums. I went to some years ago to London. The museums in Europe, the standard saying is, once you've seen one museum, you've seen them all, and that's kind of the way it is. Museums like this you usually don't see, where you can walk right up to them and look at them and read the history. You can go over and look at the Disney stuff. The children really like that as well. But I just think it's important to expose people to these beautiful things. Well, the Peoria Riverfront, I've been a member my whole adult life. And the neat thing, always something happening, and particularly since John Morris has come aboard, a lot of activity it is always exciting. But so far as a permanent display museum would be the Morris Museum down in Winter Park, Florida. It is loaded with Tiffany of all sorts, a lot of window glass, a lot of lamps, with the collection is far beyond any dream that I ever had. Also in Florida is the Rios Automobile Museum, which I'm also an automobile person, and appreciate these great old cars. And there's a wonderful museum in Naples, Florida. I bought at auction 3.5 decades ago some Tiffany glass, and this glass was the turtle backs that were used in Tiffany lamps and Tiffany glass, like church windows and so forth. And I bid on it and won. And so I had that glass around. If you hold it up to the light, it is called Fravel iridescent glass. It's just beautiful. And Tiffany made their own glass in Queens, New York. That's where Louis Comfort Tiffany was born. That's where his business was his whole life. Lived to be a very old man, but he really had quite a business, and salespeople and all around the world, Scotland and England and Germany, and he sold. If you were going to build a cathedral, you wanted Tiffany lamps and glass in there. And so he was a wealthy man. His home burned down in New York in 1935, which destroyed a lot of glass and windows and lamps. But there's a lot of it out there. They were in business for 7 decades, and so they manufactured a lot of pieces and parts and lamps and glass through all those years. And I might add, one of the people who headed up the Tiffany Girls Department was a lady named Clara Driscoll, and that was not discovered until 2007 in New York, and that's where Tiffany was born and lived his whole life, and so that's where the archives are. And it was discovered that this lamp right behind me, which is the wisteria, was actually designed by Clara Driscoll, and other lamps as well. This particular lamp has, in the description, it says 2,000 pieces of glass, but actually it's 2,150. I counted them. I would have interest in reading his patents and trademarks, even though they are closely guarded, like the Coca-Cola recipe. Nobody ever gets their hands on that. I would like very much to see the ingredients in the glass and how he did it. All old glass, if you look at all of it, this lamp right here, this Handel, is a good presentation of that ripply texture. And the reason is, if you built a house 100 years ago, the glass would be poured onto a marble slab in a molten state, and then as it hardened up, it would be cut away and sliced, but one side of it would be ripply, and that was the impression that was made from the marble slab, because the marble is never completely flat. Well, Tiffany glass is really special. Tiffany manufactured all of his own glass, unlike many of the other glass makers and lamp makers a century ago. The Kokomo Glass Company, which by the way is a long-time 125-year-old American corporation in Kokomo, Indiana, they still manufacture glass, but they don't manufacture like Tiffany did. Tiffany would bring that glass to over 2,000 degrees and add metal oxides to get these different colors. And he named iridescent Fravel. That's Fravel glass right there. And it's just a beauty that nobody else could, even though it was patented and trademarked, nobody else could reproduce it. And if you got the right kind of light, and then when that newfangled stuff called electricity came out in about 1890, that really pushed these beautiful lamps to the beauty, recognized beauty that they are. Well, importance and value, there are a couple behind me. One is the wisteria, and the other one is over here, it's the curtain border. Both of those used an enormous amount of resources to put them together, and the sales were not that great. As an example, the wisteria in 1905, that lamp sold for $1,250. You could buy a new Ford for $400. So if you see, that was an expensive lamp, and it really only appealed to the rich and famous types. My favorite lamp is the brickwork, which you can't see from here, but it's a 22-inch shade, and when you get a chance to look at it, you'll see that each piece of glass, each course of glass gets smaller as it ascends to the top, and it gives it an extra dimension of height and width. And architects use that same principle in building roof lines. I hark back all those years. I've had so much. You buy, sell, and trade. It's hard to recall, but the very first lamp that I ever bought was a lamp by the Bradley Hubbard Manufacturing Company, and they were in Clarendon, Connecticut, and actually they were in business before the Civil War, and they made a lot of, they had 350 patents, and they made a wide variety of things, and they made a lot of things for the soldiers for the North and South, like belt buckles and the awards that you would see the soldiers wearing, buttons, brass powder horns and all that. Kind of an irony, because that company, Bradley and Hubbard, did not want the South to know that this company was in the North, because that would certainly hurt their sales. And fortunately for Bradley and Hubbard, the South never did find out until after the war was over. Yeah, we're collectors. My oldest brother and I are about the same. My oldest brother, Jim, he started off collecting and repairing special lamps and clocks, particularly clocks. and he still does to this day, even though he spends half of the year in Arizona. He likes that warm weather like me. But Brother Bill and Larry were not collectors, and my father was not. Dad worked with his hands, raised 4 boys, and there wasn't a lot of money to go around to buy antiques. So, but two of his sons were pretty good collectors. So far as the lamps and where they are, they're so beautiful. I have them in my home in Peoria and in Naples, Florida. There are some things that belong in archives and protected that way and so forth, but it's my feeling that these beautiful lamps ought to be out where you can see them every day. And just walk through here now, although the museum has displayed them much better than I could have at home, but and that's one of the reasons I like to share. Not many households would have these beautiful antiques like Karen and I have, so we're just pleased to be able to share this beauty. Well, the lamps, let me back up. Last Sunday, this place was full of children. And did they go and see the Rodin bronzes? Sure they did. Did they look at the Disney? Sure they did. But most of them spent the most of time that I saw is in here around these beautiful lamps. And if you expose children at an early age to the cultural things like are on display here today, they'll come back, and it's going to spark something in them, and maybe they'll be a great artist someday.